All right, we're back with Sly Cooper here, also known as Brett Cooper.
Incredibly important questions that we should be grappling with. But now, millennials and Gen Z are facing a new and, in my opinion, completely manufactured moral question. Is it ethical to have children? And we're going to talk about that today. Before we do, though, make sure that you like this video, subscribe to this channel if you have not already, and ring that notification bell so that you never miss a comment section or off the clock episode. All right, so I first saw this article shared on Twitter by Babylon Bee CEO Seth Dillon. I saw it a few weeks ago, and I've been wanting to do an episode about it ever since, so I'm very excited that we're diving into it. He said the real battle is between the extinction and the humanists. And that is an Elon Musk quote. And then this is the New Yorker article that he posted. The morality of having kids in a burning, drowning world. Two recent books, The Quickening and The Parenthood Dilemma, consider the ethics of procreation in the age of man.
Oh God, I can already tell this is going to be incredibly stupid. The ethics. Wow.
Made climate change. Now, obviously, this article immediately piqued my interest, so I decided to browse through it, and I want to highlight one part in particular where the article's author is discussing one of the authors of these parenting or the Parenthood Dilemma books, the ethical question of parenthood. But the author wrote, the central paradox of the quickening is the private urge towards the creation of life coexisting with the imitations of its.
Before we even get into this global warming aspect, I want to talk about food. Since we have ways to synthesize food, make synthetic food, make food from just chemicals, and turn it into something that can give you enough nutrition to live, we kind of don't have the food crisis that a lot of like news outlets and shit will fearmonger into people. Like we actually have a plentiful supply of food. Obviously, certain areas of the world don't, but they'll continue to until those areas develop. That's unfortunately how the world works, but we are basically centuries away from running out of food.
Imminent destruction. Should I have a child? Their greenhouse gas emissions will cause roughly 50 square meters of sea ice to melt every year that they are alive, Rush writes.
Wow, what a waste. The poor children.
Just by existing, they will make the world a little less livable for everyone, themselves included. Which is just like the saddest thing to hear. You're thinking about children, you're thinking about the next generation of people that could make the world an incredible place. They all have the potential to do amazing, amazing things. And the only thing you can think about are the ice caps melting and how they're going to destroy the world. That's the only thing that you're focused.
She makes a good point there that these people hyper focus on that. So, first of all, the media fear mongers this stuff so they can help politicians push political agendas that typically involve taking more money from everyday people and funneling it directly to themselves and the people who help them orchestrate this scam, which is mostly the climate scientists. And I hate to get political, but this is an inherently political topic, and it's one that I actually kind of know a fair bit about, right? Like I work and am educated in basically this field, like this field of STEM, right? Like I actually once declined a job at a nuclear power plant because I would have had to have moved. It just wasn't really what I wanted to do. So I actually know a heck of a lot about this topic. So the people who push this are what's known as a climate scientist. What is a climate scientist? A climate scientist is someone who basically couldn't hack it as a real scientist. So they got into the field of being the expert in quotations who shows up on the news to be the expert and say, "Oh, it's getting warmer." Like that's literally all they do is it's getting warmer. Looks like it's getting warmer. That's bad. Ice is melting. Warmer is bad for all these reasons, right? They lay out stuff that people knew in the 50s. People knew this stuff for like 70 plus years. This isn't a new concept. And if you think about it, why do these climate scientists need to exist, right? They're not giving out new information. They're not telling us anything that we don't already know. They're just they're there to fearmonger, to push this idea, right? I remember a few years ago, would have been like 2018. There was this meme going around Facebook and like Instagram or whatever. And it was a picture of the world, but it was like burnt or like burning. And it was like the world in 12 years. So 2018, 12 years would put us at 2030. Now we're quite a bit closer to 2030. We're almost in 2024. Does anyone out there honestly think that that was like a reasonable meme to go around? Do you honestly think that in 2030, the entire globe will be just scorched? Just everything gone, just completely burned, the whole thing, right? Is that reality? Well, why is that something that's pushed on social media and mainstream media, right? Why is there so much fear mongering put into this? And I'll tell you why. It's so these governments can take more money from people and from all these organizations, all these charities. They take it from everyday people through taxes, but they also take it through rich people, through like fundraising and government fundraising. Like it's actually quite sinister when you stop and you think about why it exists, what it's there for, and what it's actually doing, right? So all these governments have been focusing so much energy on this, on tackling this subject matter. And a lot of people, a lot of individuals spend so much time focused on this, worrying about it. That Greta Thunberg or whatever, that girl who's like, "You've taken my childhood. How dare you?" That girl, she's like, "I can't live a life because you took my life." And she really just has no idea what she's talking about. She doesn't understand like what's happening in the slightest, other than the world's getting warmer. She doesn't understand how or why or what that really entails, what the implications of that are. So why does climate science exist? Why do climate scientists exist? Why are they failed scientists? Because they didn't get into a real field of science. They got into telling you that it's getting warmer. In case you didn't notice, I don't know how anyone could have not noticed that it's warmer. I mean, geez, it's the most obvious thing in the world. So why does a scientist need to tell you that? They don't. And the fact that that's what they're doing should tell you they are not scientists. Like, why else does a climate scientist need to exist? Why can't a regular scientist tell you these things, right? What is the job of a climate scientist? It is to fearmonger to people. It is to push a political agenda, right? And that's kind of commonplace in science, where in this, a lot of scientists aren't doing much science. A lot of scientists aren't very smart. If you've worked in STEM, you will have encountered this many times where you're like, or in like the education field, you're just like, this person's a scientist. They're dumber than a bag of rocks. They're one of the dumbest people I've ever met. Wow, like this, they can't. The bar for being a scientist is incredibly low, right? Like scientists are just people. Everyone's just people. Anyone who's a lawyer, a doctor, a chemical engineer, they're all just people, right? Like you know people, you've met doctors, you've met lawyers. They're just people, right? Like, um, and a lot of them have had re- like really good educational opportunities, so that's how they end up in these fields. But yeah. So anyway, I'm gonna replay a little bit.
Just like the saddest thing to hear. You're thinking about children. You're thinking about the next generation of people that could make the world an incredible place. They all have the potential to do amazing, amazing things. And the only thing you can think about are the ice caps melting.
And so this is what I wanted to talk about, is that Greta Thunberg girl. So her entire life is ruined, right? It's not through global warming that her life is ruined. It's through her parents and the people around her who promote her being this like activist, where really you're just terrifying somebody to where it is becoming this huge part of their life, and it will continue to be a huge part of their life. It's like their entire identity is now they're the global warming girl. They're the how dare you girl. Like that's awful because you're fear mongering to her, and it's working on such a high degree that it's her entire identity, that she's gotten so much positive affirmation from talking about, right? This will continue to consume that girl's entire life. Which, maybe she'll be rich off of it. Maybe she's made a lot of money. Maybe she'll keep making a lot of money. That's fine. But when your whole life, everything about you consists about being terrified of the future, that's not healthy. That's not good. Like, she literally, in that popular speech, talks about how it has destroyed her life. That's her attitude going into like later childhood, like your teenage years. And that's going to be her attitude going into her adulthood. Just having this giant burden that doesn't need to be there. And why it doesn't need to be there is because what can we do about it? Right? Are people out there? Whoever's listening to this, are you driving an electric car? You're probably not. Very few people are. Would that even make a huge difference? No, it wouldn't, because that electricity comes from usually the burning of fossil fuels. It's just a way less efficient way of getting the fuel to the vehicle, because you gotta like burn it and then convert that to electricity, then send that electricity across large pieces of land where you're having tons of electrical losses along the way. It's incredibly inefficient. But people aren't even doing that. Like 99% of people, maybe not 99, 95% of people are doing absolutely nothing to prevent global warming. Absolutely nothing. And if 95% of people are doing absolutely nothing, then even that 5% who are doing the tiniest little bit of anything, I'm sorry, but that's just not really going to do anything. Our demand for like oil and coal globally, like, I'm sorry, but the environment, the atmosphere of our world, it's a global thing. So everywhere affects everywhere else, right? And guess what? We're continuing to burn more coal. We're burning more fossil fuels. We're needing more fuel for more vehicles. We're getting more and more uptight about think about the world getting warmer. We're probably using a lot more electricity to use in air conditioning in people's houses, right? These last few years, they've been warm ones, and you don't need to be a climate scientist to tell to tell that the world's been getting warmer. So, an important thing to keep in mind is what can we do, right? Not all that much. The only realistic thing that we can do is promote creating more hydroelectric facilities and more nuclear power plants, right? Because those are cleaner ways to make a lot of electricity. Besides that, there's really not a lot we can do at all. Like, we're gonna still need fuel for vehicles. That's not going anywhere anytime soon. And ultimately, I think this idea that we're to blame is ridiculous. And it creates a lot of hatred. That's the main problem I have with it. It's this vilification of everyone, blaming humans, blaming your neighbor. Like, if we're really headed towards this epic crisis, we need to be on the same team, not against each other. And we don't need to be against each other and like blaming each other for this. Because I don't know if you know this, but the world, the earth, has been heating up consistently. A consistent trend up since the Ice Age, right? And the Ice Age lasted an incredibly long time, way longer than you might expect. So pretty much for like about 15 to 20,000 years, the earth has been heating up. I'm sorry, but us burning fuel in the last 100 years, yeah, I would agree we've made it a little worse, but it wouldn't have mattered anyway. we still would have we still were on the upward trajectory no matter what. The Earth is still heating up regardless. You know, yes, for the last 100 years, we've made it a little worse, a tiny bit worse. But for the previous like 15,000 years, it's only been increasing in temperature, right? Obviously, some years are colder than others. There's a kind of like ups and downs, there's peaks and valleys, but it's always going up. It's always slowly creeping up. And it was doing that for 15,000 years before we burned any fossil fuels. So to blame humans is crazy. Yes, you can say that what we're doing isn't great, that we're making things happen quicker. So there's kind of this like rapid warming that's really going to hit us hard. But how hard? I don't think it's going to hit us that hard. I think we're pretty prepared for it, and we have been for a while. Yeah, maybe some coastal cities could, prepare a little more. But yeah, I mean, it's happening. There's literally nothing we can do to stop it. There's never been anything we can do to stop it. And all you have to do is look at a graph of the global temperature going back 15,000 years. You'll see the trend. It's there. I could pull it up for you if you'd like.
And how they're going to destroy the world. That's the only thing that you're focusing on. Just imagine for a second having a parent who is so concerned about the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that your mere existence will yield and how much ice will melt just because you're alive.
Well, I'm out of here. Goodbye, everyone.
It's just incredibly sad that this is the position that so many people have. It's absolute insanity, in my opinion. Jeremy had a great response to this article on X, and he said, human life is of infinitely greater value than a sheet of ice. Have babies, burn tires. And it's crazy that that is a controversial statement, that human life is more valuable, but obviously we know what goes on in 2023, so it shouldn't surprise us. But somebody replied and said, imagine hating yourself so much that you believe people should stop reproducing. But I mean, it's the self-hating white liberals. Are we surprised by any of this? No, we're not. And also, having no faith in human innovation or the ability for us to protect our environment at all, just completely being hopeless. Being a perpetual victim, it just sounds like a very, very sad way to live. Also, being so indoctrinated by your government that you believe that the only way to protect the environment is by passing things like the Green New Deal, which would destroy our economy, by the way, just further controlling our population, which would be disastrous for mankind, mandating EVs, banning gas stoves. Like, you think that that is of greater importance than having children who could change the world. It's insane. Somebody else said, imagine a species thinking that it's the smartest species on the planet while rooting for its own extinction to save the planet. Another person said, it's interesting how natural selection can operate through abstract ideas. If the people who swallow this choose not to procreate, future generations might be a bit less neurotic.
All right, I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about here. So this graph, right, in the top right of your screen, shows the temperature, the average global temperature over time. So an important part to look at is the very end. So I don't know exactly how high this goes. As you can see, it goes from 0, this notch you see here, which also goes up here, and then you see it kind of spike right at the very end. Now, where that actual end truly is, I do not know, but you see it spike up from the year 0 to, oh, I guess it says it right here. I'm dumb. 2019. So from just this little notch here, it goes from, spans over 2,000 years, just over 2,000. So the important thing to keep in mind is that that's a large amount of time. So look at these other gaps of 2,000 years, right? You're seeing all these other time frames have gaps of 2,000 years on this chart. I can make it bigger. I'm just going to make it bigger. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm kind of just winging it. That's how I make videos. I just live react to whatever somebody's talking about. There we go. I'll zoom in a little. Too much. I'm not great with MS Paint, but oh God, that's terrible. So you can see what I'm talking about here a bit better. So just from the 0 to this end of the graph, this right end of the graph, that's 2000. But over on the left side of the graph, you see like these large gaps of time. So yeah, this, what I'm getting at is that this sharp spike you see before you at the very end, it looks really dramatic, but you have to also consider that that's spanning 2,000 years. So that should be a lot wider if the graph was consistent in its like measurement of time. So it's kind of like skewed to make you think that it's spiking up even more dramatically than it is, because this should be the size of one of these. I'll crop it out, just crop out a chunk of the graph. So really this should be here. So we'll just make a line all the way to the end. So there, that line is now where this should be. So this should be from like here to there. That's how the graph should actually look to be consistent. So you can see here on the left where it spikes even higher, even quicker than what the spike actually is. So my point is, what this should be telling you, what this graph is telling you, what it tells anyone who has logical thoughts in their head, is we were always going to make it here. Because throughout this time where it kind of plateaus, you're having the ice, the like permanent ice at the poles is melting continually. So we were always inevitably going to reach this point where that ice was going to melt, and that was no longer going to reflect more sun back out into space, out of our atmosphere, right? So there's a few important things that I hope Brett Cooper touches on here, but we'll continue on to see what else she has to say.
Erotic on average, marketplace of ideas wins again. That is the one positive outcome of these people choosing not to have kids. Another person said, the very idea that we would come to a fight between those who want to commit suicide as a species versus those who don't is baffling to me. How and why we got here needs to be understood so that it never happens again.
That's a really good point that this person made, because it's this insane conflict. Like, people build up this conflict and this drama when all they have to do is look at the reality of the world, the actual science, the data. I'm sorry, but we were always going to make it here. This was always the trend. This was always going to happen. We were always going to reach a point where all the ice was going to melt. It was going to get too hot. And guess what? That's going to continue to cause a spike. We were always going to hit this boiling point where, yes, over the next, I don't know, couple decades, maybe century, it's going to get quite a bit warmer. It is. It sucks. There's some negative ramifications, but that's what's going to happen. We should be preparing for that a little more, rather than focusing on like trying to shame people and stop people from that last real spike happening. Because logically, we're not going to have another spike, right? Like, the ice isn't going to melt again. You know what I mean? And yeah, I don't get it. I don't get how people can sit there and they use roads. They drive their gas vehicle. They're in a house that's heated, air conditioned. But they want to act like doing these tiny things here or there is doing so much, and they're like this crusader, yet they're doing almost nothing to even
Chris Williamson and Jordan Peterson
to keep in line with their ideology, or what they assume is actually going to solve the problem. Most of them aren't even throwing out a single idea that actually would solve the problem in any kind of way.
both of whom I adore. They've talked about this problem before, and I think that they have some great insight on it.
50.1% of women are childless by 30. And both men and women are replying to that tweet saying, well, good, there's too many people on the planet in any case.
There's no sentiment more implicitly genocidal than that statement. So what do you mean too many people? And what do you propose to do about that exactly? Mass abortion, is that your answer? Maybe we'll just shame people out of having children. There's a number of professors talking to a couple hundred students, and one of the professors, who was an environmentalist, nationalist activist type. And he got up on stage and shook his finger to the whole young crowd, saying that him and his wife had only decided to have one child. Told all the young people there if they had a shred of ethical decency that they would severely limit their reproductive potential. And I stood up and said that I thought that that was one of the most appalling things I'd ever heard anyone in academia say to young people. But it's associated with like a deeply rooted existential self-hatred. I mean, hatred at the level of humanity is like a virus on the planet, that we're a cancerous growth.
Alex Epstein calls this human racism.
That's an excellent way to put it. And Jordan is so right, because it does go back to self-hatred. That's what these commenters have been saying. Like, imagine hating yourself so much that you just don't want our species to exist anymore. You have no hope at all. You're sinking! Come on! It's like this victim mentality that we see in so many parts of our society. All of this hatred. This is honestly, it could be the worst that it'll ever get, because it could end us all. It could just stop everything in its tracks. But honestly, we shouldn't be surprised about all of this, because these are the same attitudes that come from people who push abortion. Now, speaking of abortion, because of our partnership with Preborn, an organization that has rescued over 270,000 babies, you can join the fight for life. Every day, modernity is its own kill switch. Yeah, somebody else commented and said the one-child policy worked out so well for China, let's do that. Like, literally, did people not hear that China reversed that policy because of the disastrous effects? That was a huge deal.
Yeah, I mean, if the rest of the video is about this, the insanity of stopping people from having kids, I don't really want to talk too much about that. Obviously, it's crazy. Obviously, you're going way overboard. This isn't going to really affect anything. I know there's a lot of emphasis on like how overpopulation is this major issue and how there's like food shortages and water shortages, but I mean, we've come up with so many solutions to those problems, and in so much of the world, we've solved the food problem. Just people don't know that we have. People just don't consider that most of the food out there, you go to a grocery store, most of the aisles, it's like food that's made up of just chemicals and like maybe some natural ingredients and stuff, but most of it's pretty synthetic. And think about what that means. That means we're using other crap to make food. That's pretty important, and it's often overlooked. People will sit there, and there's plenty of people who exist where they're like, I don't want to have any processed food. I don't want to have any of this fake food. I want to have all natural, this and that. But then somehow that doesn't come into play when we talk about running out of food or this like global warming stuff with all these people talking about the cow farts. Like, I don't know. I just don't think we're really going to see that much of this tipping point. Like, yes, after the ice melts, it's going to continue to get hotter, right? The world will. It's what will happen. It's what always was going to happen. That's the way the world works. That's the way science works. That's what this graph is always displaying, right? And it will continue way beyond here. So we're going to go from here, and it will legitimately continue to spike up even further. The further you go along the graph, it will keep going. So we're going to go here. Well, this is just the actual, let's say this is where we are now, right at this nub. Guess what? It's going to continue. It's going to get a little steeper. But then, once the ice melts, then we will eventually like kind of hit another plateau. Now, just logically, it'll mellow out. And this represents like thousands, tens of thousands of years, 20,000 years. I think we're going to make it, guys. I think we can handle a bit more water in the oceans. You know, and a lot of people are going to suffer droughts and famines in certain areas of the world. That really sucks, you know? We should do what we can to help those people. But that's all we really can do. No one's doing anything else to like prevent any of this from happening. And there's no logical solution out there. No one's come up with any kind of solution to reverse this. right? Because think about it. Think about how bold you would have to be. You'd have to come up with something so crazy to completely reverse this trend. So say we're here to like start going the other way. Like think about how insane it would be to reverse that trend. Something that's been going on since the Ice Age. Literally, we've been warming up for the last like 20,000 years. To reverse that trend, you would have to do something really incredible. And maybe that's just the cycle of the world. I don't know how far back this kind of graph goes, but there was, as far as I understand it, there was like, it was warm at some point before the Ice Age. You know, it wasn't always Ice Age. I've seen the movie. But you know what I mean? Like, maybe it will cycle back. Maybe this graph up here, it actually kind of, the real one, kind of starts to like eventually swing the other way. And eventually we're actually like declining. You know? So this one isn't even necessarily the real one. The real one could be one where things kind of work out for us. I just don't see how what I'm displaying in this graph is like world ending, entire world on fire, everyone's gonna die. We need to spend trillions of tax dollars to combat this. And what are we doing to combat this, right? So people, you might remember a guy named Al Gore. So he came out with this documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. And it was huge. I had to watch this in school more than once. Far more than I would like. Ooh, there's a video here. The many errors of An Inconvenient Truth. Just this documentary about global warming. For a lot of people, it was their introduction to the idea. So Al Gore drums up all this buzz. More buzz than maybe has ever been drummed up from a documentary. And he gets all kinds of funding from all these different groups, all these different governments. What does he do with that? How does he truly combat global warming? What was his plan? What does he ultimately end up doing? So what Al Gore does, right? Former Vice President Al Gore, he makes power plants all over the place, all over America. And what do those power plants do? You might be thinking, oh, maybe they're wind, maybe they're solar, maybe they're nuclear, you know, the clean forms of energy. Nope. So what these plants do is they take wood and they burn it and they make it into electricity. So much like burning coal or burning fossil fuels, they burn wood. That's what this all was all about for Al Gore. That's what he did. That's what he does. That's what he's doing. You know, you might think, where'd that guy go? What did he get up to? What's his plan? What was that all about? Yep, burning wood. You know, the trees, those things that, you know, take CO2 out of the air and release more oxygen into the atmosphere. Let's cut those down and burn them to make electricity. A lot of people don't know that because there's actually a really good documentary that will lay this out better than I can, unless I make my own documentary about it, which I've actually thought about doing. It's called Planet of the Humans. Now, this documentary unfortunately released in like March of 2020, so nobody cared. It was like right around the time when the entire world shut down, right? There was a global pandemic. No one cared about global warming. So what this in that documentary goes over all of this, but I already understood all the like unfortunate like fear mongering and misinformation out there about global warming, all the insanity of like blaming it on humans when literally 20,000 years before we ever burnt fossil fuels, the trend was already warming up quite a bit. The trend was going upward for a really long time before we started affecting it in any kind of way. But yeah, this documentary, Planet of the Humans, actually the documentary filmmaker Michael Moore, he like helped produce it or something. He's not in it, but they talk about some pretty cool stuff. And I hope this kind of helped you a little bit to understand. I always wanted to make a video about global warming and talk about these kinds of things, but a lot of people just don't. Their misinformation is so deeply ingrained in their ideology, it's hard for them to even begin to see what I'm talking about, right? And when I watched this documentary, Planet of the Humans, I actually thought of ways that I would go even deeper. Like, I would talk about things that they didn't even come close to bringing up, because I don't think that many people really think about what's going on. I'll throw out one thing in particular that I thought they could have touched on. So, a lot of people really love solar power. So what is solar power, right? Like, think about what's going on with global warming, right? The problem with global warming's greenhouse effect is that the heat from the sun is coming in, but it's not leaving the greenhouse. That is our atmosphere, right? That's the greenhouse effect. That's global warming, or man-made global warming. That's the concept of it. So if that's the case, does it really make sense that we're gonna trap that heat from the sun, right? Because one thing you gotta know about heat is that heat is energy, and heat from the sun is also radiation. So we're literally taking solar radiation and stopping it from bouncing off of the grass, the trees, or whatever, and bouncing back into space. We're literally like capturing it to meet our electric needs. Is that the best idea? That's kind of one thing that I would have touched on. Would have been like, no one ever talks about this, and I've literally never had a conversation with somebody about this, because usually people are confused as to what I'm even talking about. But really, just stop and think about it for a moment. We're just capturing that heat, that radiation, that heat energy. And it's converted to electrical energy, but we're capturing it. We're stopping it. We're storing it. We're keeping it here on Earth. Maybe that's not the best idea. And another thing there, that's radiation from the sun that would radiate back out to space. So we're also just capturing more radiation. And a lot of people are pretty afraid of radiation. I'm not really, but I also really I would be pretty worried about, like, say, having a solar panel on my roof, especially if I was sleeping in like the room upstairs, because what my teachers taught me in college was, if you live near power lines, don't live near power lines. Those big towers, those like tall towers that have like 8 or 6 or however many big power cables, don't live near those, because it creates this field of electromagnetism, and that electromagnetism has effects on you, right? It has negative effects. It can like give you cancer and a whole host of other issues, because you're not really made to be like in this like crazy field of electromagnetism for extended periods of time, right? And so having that like right above where you sleep, this thing that's, locking in, that its entire purpose is to capture the sun's radiation and not let it escape. Maybe that's not the best. Maybe we should maybe we should look into that. Maybe it should at least be something that people talk about, right? A lot of people have never even had one conversation about these kinds of things, but I think it's worth looking into. Most people have never even considered looking into it. Like, hey, so this radiation capture device, might it be a little radioactive? Like, maybe we shouldn't be too close to that thing. Maybe that thing shouldn't be right above where I sleep. You know, we know that we shouldn't be allowed around too many electromagnetic fields. So having one, sleeping in one, might be an issue. But no, they'll never look into this stuff. They'll never talk about it. You'll never hear someone talking about that on the news because it doesn't meet the narrative that you're not doing enough. You don't have a solar panel on your roof, you're not doing enough. You're not driving a Tesla, you're not doing enough. You're eating meat. Well, guess what? You're not doing enough because you should be eating beyond meat. You know, it's around every corner, it's your fault. Like, really think about that. Really think about what these like climate scientists are saying. Read between the lines of what they're saying. They're saying that somehow this is your fault. Somehow this trend of increased temperature globally. Think about how big the world is. Somehow it's your fault. Now, just completely ignore that the Earth's been heating up since the Ice Age. Somehow it's your fault. I don't know. I just don't think it's your fault. I'm not blaming you. That's how I am. I'm not going to blame you. I won't do it.